bank. God damn it. Oh, hello everybody. It is I, mainly Mandy, your resident chaotic bisexual. Last month was Pride, as I'm sure you are all aware, and just like with every Pride month that came before it, the LGBT plus community found itself tackling a variety of important questions. My cat is here. Hi, Tantrum. Can you just sit down, please? Things like, should cops be allowed at Pride? Is kink acceptable to be included as part of the celebrations? And, perhaps most important of all, why are so many songs about queer women's experiences about a woman named Jenny? Jenny by the Studio Killers, Jenny by Julian, I Kissed a Girl, not the aughts version by Katy Perry like you might be thinking. We never actually learned the name of said girl that was kissed. Rather, I was referring to the 1995 song by Jill Sobule.
I kissed a girl.
But considering the pattern established, Katie was probably singing about a Jenny too. Who is this mysterious Jenny? Why is she ripping through queer women's hearts like toilet paper? And why haven't we made out yet? What is it, Jenny? Do I need to be gayer? I can be gayer. Jenny, baby, just give me a chance. What was I talking about again? Oh, right. Pride. There's a question in particular that comes up in my circles basically around this time every year. It's one that I imagine many of my viewers may have also brought up with their friends and or polycules. It's very likely the name of this video. The question, of course, is being polyamorous queer? Oh, don't look at me. I don't know.
I don't know why this lady named Jenny's going around kissing so many ladies like a car full of clowns.
So the question, is being non-monogamous a queer identity, is a very complicated one, partially because the conversation is still ongoing. The community has not come to anything remotely close to a consensus, and honestly, I doubt we will anytime soon. While gearing up for this video, I was alerted that the annual discourse had started up once again, and unsurprisingly, it was already pretty heated.
Okay, so read this polyamory at Pride discourse. Trans people are facing an ever-accelerating onslaught of genocidal legislation, homophobia is skyrocketing back to Bush-era bigotry, queer history is getting erased from public school curricula, and this is your priority?
No, polyamory isn't intrinsically queer, but guess what? We don't have the same rights as monogamous couples do. I can't marry more than one partner. I can't be recognised by law in most places as even life partners. So maybe there's a reason polyam people want to be at Pride.
Poly relationships are inherently queer. Literally, there is no way it can be purely heterosexual.
Polyamory has as much to do with being gay or trans as being gay and being trans have to do with each other. Seems weird to group LGB and T, but then boo and hiss about polyamory.
Did anyone say people couldn't bring their two girlfriends to Pride? How would you even enforce that?
Polyamory is a choice. Monogamy is a choice. Cheating is a choice. Being queer, gay, trans, non-binary are not choices.
It's just straight people trying to claim they're queer for having more than one partner.
Polyamory is absolutely queer. I don't even know how this is even up for debate. It goes against social norms. Polyamory is discouraged and persecuted. I've had my relationships completely invalidated on the basis of them being poly, even by people who were fine with me being trans and gay.
This discourse is exclusively peddled by federal agents. It's very hard to be poly and not queer, so who cares what the rules are? Now, can we worry about how we're going to effectively remove every cop from Pride this year instead of engaging in psyops?
Sir, they're on to us. Because of this, it honestly doesn't feel right for me to just plop in front of the camera and just monologue at you all for 45 minutes like I usually do. I mean, there's definitely still going to be some of that, but considerably less than what I usually do. So I decided to get some friends involved.
My name is Sally. I go by they, she pronouns for the most part, and I live in Vancouver, Canada. People have also started calling me Anrel recently, which is my channel name, so either is fine. I practice relationship anarchy and would label my queerness as queer. I don't know, it's like a whole thing. There's so many different labels that could and do apply in different contexts, and I don't really want to have to, like, subject people to a dissertation on queer anarchist theory every time they, like, ask for my pronouns or whatever, you know what I mean? So queer. Queer is good. Short. All-encompassing. Details are revealed as they come up, usually. I mean, look, my gender is queer, my sexuality is queer, my race is queer, my politics are queer, my neurotype is queer, my body is queerly abled. I don't really fit cleanly into many boxes, if any. Conformity is not my strong suit, and I love that for me.
Hello, my name is Artemis Munoz. My pronouns are they, them. I would describe myself as a relationship anarchist, and I also identify as being aspec, which is on the asexual and aromantic spectrums, which I think will be quite relevant to this video, so I thought I should bring that up straight away. Potentially also relevant will be the fact that I identify as a few ways neurodivergent. I'm an ADHDer. That's probably what's going to be the most relevant, so we might just leave it at that. To give some cultural context, I live on Wurundjeri country near Naarm, which most people who don't live around here would probably better know by its colonial name of Melbourne, Australia. I won't get into the politics of that, but yeah, that's where I live. It's where I was born, and I grew up in the outer northern suburbs, raised by a family that on one side is Maltese and one side is Chilean. Yeah, so that's the cultural context I bring to answering all of these questions as well.
My name is Laura Boyle. I'm an author and educator. I've been polyamorous for 16 years, and I currently identify with a sort of more relationship anarchist manner of practicing my non-monogamy, but I think polyamory is still probably the label that best applies to me. I'm bisexual. I've been out for several years, and for other sort of identities or different intersections that I occupy, I'm disabled and I am neurodivergent. I have ADHD and I'm autistic.
Hi, my name is Tucker Woolley. I use he, they pronouns and identify as a non-binary man, and I live near Los Angeles, California. I'm bi/pan/queer. I use the three pretty interchangeably, as some people do. Basically, just everyone's welcome. I'm polyamorous with 3 partners as of time of recording. I like relationship anarchy a lot and am trying to integrate it into my life as much as one can do in a non-anarchic society. I am pretty neurodivergent. Still figuring out exactly which flavors, but yes, definite atypical brain over here. I've struggled with anxiety and depression pretty much all my life.
My name is Vivian Strange, my pronouns are she, they, and I live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm weird about my labels, but as far as polyamory goes, I practice relationship anarchy. And regarding my queerness, I find affinity with the labels queer, lesbian, non-binary, gay, trans, transfemme, and ultimately gender weird, a term of my own coinage. I'm also some form of neurodivergent, professionals can't seem to agree, and somewhere on the gray sexuality spectrum, which I'm still trying to figure out. As far as my ideological inclinations go, I am a passionate, black-blooded anarchist, so you might get stranger answers from me than a lot of the other folks, so I hope you enjoy.
Hello, I'm Zylla. I live in Massachusetts, in the United States, and I grew up in Texas in the United States, so there's some variety for you. I am non-monogamous. I don't really know with great detail which subtype I will end up falling into over the course of my life, but for now what that means is that I live with one partner that I've been with for coming up 4 years. I've also been dating another partner for almost a year, and I'm not closed to having other relationships, and I'm not closed to them having other relationships. Both of them do. We call ourselves polyamorous. I haven't really thought to specify beyond that. Usually what I'll say is that I am agender, for sure. I am polyamorous of some denomination, that I am very demi, and that I don't experience aesthetic attraction. There are some other things that might or might not fit any one particular label, but you know what? Those are enough.
I have friends. I definitely have friends. No one can say that I do not have friends.
The parameters of this exercise are pretty simple. I made up a document of 19 questions and sent that out to people who identify as both non-monogamous and queer. For the purposes of this video, queer and non-monogamous are being used in kind of general umbrella terms. Non-monogamous can include solo polyamory, don't ask, don't tell arrangements, open relationships, relationship anarchy, kitchen table polyamory, etc. Similarly, queer can be a stand-in for gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual, asexual, demi, aromantic. You get the idea. I sent messages to polyamorous influencers, YouTube creators, and even friends of friends who express interest in the project. Now, as a heads up, just due to the number of responses I got and how lengthy some of them are, you unfortunately are not going to get every single answer to every question that I asked everybody for this video. If I did that, it would be just far too long of a video, and I'm already running behind as is, so unfortunately you will not have access to that. With that said, I am going to be making up a little special for all of my Patreon supporters over on patreon.com/MaileyMandy, which will basically just be one long video of all the respondents' answers to the questions without my commentary in. So if you are interested in having access to that, please go over to Patreon, sign up at any level that you can, comfortably afford, and you'll have access to that. At time of recording, I am waiting for one of the responses to come in, but the video is looking like it's going to be like 3 hours long. But trust me, you don't want to miss out on that because everybody had like really interesting answers, and honestly, I wish I could have used more. So I definitely highly recommend signing up so that you can have access to this really insightful video. Also, just as a heads up, this video is kind of chill for the most part, quote unquote. Like, I don't really think this is a video that really requires trigger warnings. We are going to be later in the video talking a bit about like oppression and discrimination that specifically like queer people and non-monogamous people can sometimes face. But even then, we're not going to go like too detailed or too dark. But if that's something that is important for you to know ahead of time, here's your content warning. But for the most part, this is going to be a pretty comfortable conversation, I think. I just wanted to, give you all the heads up. Hello, everybody. It's Editing Mandy here. My job is to come in when I'm editing the video and point out when past Amanda's got some, got a leg on her face, which she does right now, because I totally forgot when I recorded this that there's a whole section where we get into some transphobia. So that section's gonna probably not be fun for some people. That won't be fun. I will warn you in the titles when that's coming up, but just a heads up, there is a bit of transphobia that we're gonna be talking about later. And there's also a section where we're gonna be talking a little bit about some like ace negative feelings as well. So be aware of that going into this video, and I apologize for past Mandy. She know not what she do. Let's get gay!
Where is she now? How can we guess?
Okay, so let's start off with something super duper easy. How do we define queer? Super duper uber easy.
I personally really enjoy and feel empowered by the use of queer as an umbrella term. Queer as in outside the norm. It doesn't take too many steps to determine that the norm is actually a minority of people on Earth, as in cis, straight, acceptably binary male, or acceptably binary female, with all the cultural baggage each entail. White, abled, homed, and not impoverished. And I do think monogamous falls into this category too, but I'll get into that soon.
I mean, that's a really tough question, isn't it? So, for me, queer has always sort of stood for anything that falls under LGBTQ, etc. Like the whole, what do they call it now, the alphabet mafia? But in doing so, it's kind of come to be associated for me with anything to do with gender, sexuality, orientation, relationship, style, that is that is a very fundamental quality of a person and how they interact with the world rather than a hobby.
I don't like queer as in gay, I like queer as in fuck you, queer as in deviant, as in explicitly moving towards a queering of society and of societal norms. Queer as a verb as much as it is a noun, and the verb isn't about who you're fucking, but what you're fucking up. Queer is in challenging and directly oppositional to hegemonic norms regarding, gender and sexuality and relating. In a nutshell, queerness to me is not a different box. It is the deconstruction of box.
So the talking point that I see a lot of focus on is differentiating between queer the noun and queer the verb. As I said at the top of this video, for the purposes of this, I reached out to a lot of people who sort of fit under queer the noun, bisexuals, trans people, asexuals, etc. But there should definitely be a recognition of queer the verb, the act of queering spaces, experiences, etc. Sarah from the Leftist Cooks makes the distinction that queer the verb is about disruption, a kind of protest of the norm.
It does a disservice to queerness to define it, but what it is at its core is a form of revolt. Queer is a noun referring to someone who queers, who bends, subverts, laughs at. Chicana feminist and poet Gloria Anzaldúa was an early adopter of the term, using it to signify her Chicana identity as a queering of race and her lesbian identity as a queering of cis-heteropatriarchy.
Identity is not a bunch of little cubbyholes stuffed respectively with intellect, race, sex, class, vocation, gender. Identity flows between, over aspects of a person. Identity is a river, a process.
It isn't incidental that she is a poet. The definitions she gives of queer are metaphors and codes, and that's the point. Eve Sedgwick, another mother of the term, explained it thusly.
One of the things that queer can refer to is the open mesh of possibilities. Gaps, overlaps, dissonances and resonances, lapses and excesses of meaning when the constituent elements of anyone's gender or of anyone's sexuality aren't made or can't be made to signify monolithically.
To be queer, in the queer theory sense, is to situate yourself as a disruption to the norm. You can be LGBT and not queer. A white cis man who has a monogamous civil partnership ceremony with another white cis man votes for the Tories and wants everyone to know he's exactly like straight people. That dude isn't queer. You're not inherently queer no matter how many marginalized identities you have, not if you're trying to climb the hierarchy rather than disrupt it. Queer is an embrace of sexuality as a form of revolt.
Now, I do have some concerns, gentle criticisms that we'll get into a bit later, but for now, I do just want to say I love that you can basically distill this argument down into the old, not gay as in happy, queer as in you. This is basically a conversation that for some means engaging in queer theory. What is queer theory? Well, Susan Song describes it as so.
Queer theory questions what is normal and what creates hierarchical differences between us, opening up new sites of struggle outside of class politics alone. From feminist theory emerged the idea that gender is socially and not biologically constructed, and therefore not innate, natural, stable, or essential to someone's identity due to their biology. Instead, gender is a product of social norms, individual behaviors, and institutional power. Gay and lesbian studies added to the discourse around gender and sexuality by introducing homosexuality and LGBT identities as areas to be queried. Following the work of feminist theory and gay and lesbian studies, queer theory understands sexuality and sexual behaviors as similarly socially constructed and historically contingent. Queer theory allows for a multiplicity of sexual practices that challenge heteronormativity, such as non-monogamy, BDSM relationships, and sex work.
So when we're discussing the potential queerness of polyamory, we have this sort of immediate point of contention that we have to address. One that we must talk about first if we're going to be able to enter this conversation understanding each other. Is it a noun, as in polyamorous with a big old capital P in the ever-growing alphabet mafia? Or is it a verb, polyamorying the spaces that we're a part of.
So for what does queer mean to me? That's like a gigantic question that is really kind of hard to encompass. But my answer is largely informed by this idea of queer as being outside of social norms, right? So there's the bell hooks quote that says that it's not just about who you're sleeping with, although that can be a dimension of it, right? So it's that idea. It's the fact that it is altering a social fabric or choosing to engage in relationships in a way that is highly non-normative, to me is queer, in addition to the sort of more broadly understood being homosexual is automatically queer, being bisexual is automatically queer kind of sense that has been largely created by like AIDS activists retaking the word queer in the 80s.
Queerness for me is deviance in relation to power. See, the structures of power that we're all trapped within have a very rigid, inflexible, specific model for how everyone under it must behave and, well, be. This model is necessarily cis-heteronormative, monogamous, built on an essentialist gender binary, and white supremacy, of course. Can't overlook that. So, to me, queerness is the most encompassing term for everyone who lives, practices, and performs gender, sexuality, any interpersonal relationship dynamics, etc., outside of the confines of the oppressive and restrictive model power is fashioned to control us.
I like to think of queer as a verb. Like, whilst I identify as a queer person, I also think that, you know, to queer is to bend, to fuck with, to challenge, to make a little, I guess, subversive, anything that we've been taught as a norm. In terms of to be a queer person, I identify with that through, my relationship to sex, sexuality, gender relationships being outside of that norm. So whilst I would say queering norms in general is heckin' awesome, and, you know, you can queer norms related to disability or all sorts of things. When we specifically talk about queer people in the queer community, it does come from that context of, sex, sexuality, romance, relationships, gender, all of those things. And honestly, I think the biggest consideration there is kind of gender roles, gender norms, and also amatonormativity.
By the way, I do want to mention that for the purposes of this video, I did attempt to read some queer theory, which honestly is something I kind of struggle with a bit. It's something I struggled with so much that at times I don't feel like I'm allowed, quote unquote, to call myself an anarchist, because like, can you truly be a real leftist anarchist if you've never read Marx? Theory sometimes is just way too dry and dense and abstract for my little fembo brain, okay? It's actually a really big reason why I like YouTube videos so much, you know, like explain to me some theory involving like costumes and a skit and like grounded in a piece of media that I recognize, and I am in, baby. Anyway, I did try to read a little to be a big brain smart girl. All of those resources will, of course, be available in a document in the description box below. But if anyone is a bit underwhelmed by my attempts, fair. Though to make up for my flaws, here is a quick video of my cats doing something cute. Did you seriously stop as soon as I started filming? You jerk. Okay, but now let's get into some actual talking points.
What does she look like? How does she dress?
So many cishet norms rely on monogamy, or at least the appearance of it. The pressure to hide cishet unethical non-monogamy, also known as cheating, suddenly in queerness becomes a triumphant exultation in breaking free of yet another rule, to celebrate ethical non-monogamy. We're already playing a game of redefining acceptable boundaries of intimacy. This redefinition is an easy additional point. Queers know a thing or two about defying norms. What's one more?
Okay, so perhaps the simplest way to distill the pro-polyamory is queer argument is to just say, well, monogamy is the norm, polyamory isn't, ergo, queer. Obviously a vast oversimplification, but I mean, I do still think it's fair. This is why I wanted to start off this video talking a little bit about the difference of seeing queer as a noun versus a verb. Because seeing queer as a verb opens up way more possibilities around acting in non-normative ways that would then qualify somebody to use this label. Defined this way, queer becomes far more nebulous, far-reaching, and expansive. A house filled with single mothers all helping each other to raise their children could be seen acting queerly, even if they're all cis and straight. And thus the argument goes that non-monogamy would qualify because, despite what a few fear-mongering articles out there are trying to tell you, it is very much not a part of the norm. Therefore, to act non-monogamous is to be acting queer.
Does your queerness and polyamory/non-monogamy intersect? Another way to word this, do you see being polyamorous or non-monogamous as linked to being queer? Yeah, they intersect with each other and everything else. Of course they do, yeah. Yeah, they're the same thing. They're the same picture.
This also means that queerness is defined more by the disruption of norms than by having a more solid LGBT plus identity. The LGBT plus community has historically and continues to not exactly agree on what all of our values and goals should be. Some think that assimilation should be the focus, which, keeping that definition of queerness being a disruption in mind, would then make some people no longer qualified to be using that label. A term I found to discuss this was homonormativity.
Homonormativity is the assimilation of queer people, especially homosexual people, into a heteronormative system without challenging the core ideas of heteronormativity. Homonormativity is heteronormativity, repackaged and tied up with an elaborate rainbow ribbon. It looks attractive, but once we start to unpack it, we realize it's the same toxic oppression we sought to remove in the first place. The problem with homonormativity is that we are conforming to an oppressive system. Because of this, we end up reproducing the harmful idea that certain kinds of relationships are better and more acceptable than others. Queers often assimilate into heteronormative ideals because we want the same kind of privilege that is afforded to straight people. We want to send out the message that we're just like straight people, except we're queer. We try to make ourselves seem more normal, less deviant, and more acceptable.
So according to this argument, a gay man who fully assimilates to the system would not be queer. Partially because he probably isn't using that word to define himself anyway, but also because he isn't really doing anything to challenge the status quo. His ability to love and be intimate with men is certainly a non-normative desire, but if everything else about him is about assimilating, supporting capitalism, not really challenging the oppressive systems that, keep certain people in power and other ones not, so I just really said capitalism twice, then he is not queer. Now, personally, I have a bit of a problem with this argument. Firstly, the gay man who is otherwise assimilating to the state and the system can still be the target of harassment and bigotry. He is still, by way of just loving who he does, running the risk that he might get slurs yelled at him while he is walking down the street, or perhaps face discrimination depending on which business he walks into. We'll talk a bit more later about why I don't think defining queerness by oppression is a particularly perfect argument either, but in the meantime, it's important to acknowledge that for those of us who do see queer as more of a noun, like a tangible thing people are, that does in part come from a need for community, of having people around us who understand the kind of discrimination and challenges that we face. Queer in this way becomes kind of a badge of honor, a way of acknowledging the way that our lives fit outside of the assumed default, straightness. Many of us are complicit in one way to another to the continuation of harmful systems, things like predatory housing markets or ableist work environments. If you haven't burned down a landlord's office recently, can you really be considered a true radical?
I think that there are two different ideas, and this is why I consider the queer community as being separate from the LGBTQIA+ community, why I separate those things in my head, because on one hand, you have a group that is seeking assimilation, normalization, essentially. It's like, we're just like you, normal people. Please let us just exist. We don't want to cause any trouble. And then there's the other group who really does want to cause a bit of trouble, that says that the systems, the assumptions of the systems we're living under are oppressive just in their very nature, and they need to be deconstructed and torn down and played with, and that's fun and good and okay, actually, to be a little bit deviant. Wanting to deconstruct this idea of how we must relate to each other in terms of you have one partner and one partner only, and that partner is the most important person to you in your life. Like, I think that is very queer. But I don't think that every person who is polyamorous or who is non-monogamous is actively working to subvert those systems. I think some people just, they want to enjoy having multiple partners and they're not thinking in that systemic way, and that's cool too. And that's why, again, so there's the assimilationist side, and then there's the more radical, subverting, unpacking side.
I want to be clear. I do believe that identities are socially created. We notice certain behaviors and put them into little boxes with neat little labels on them to sort of explain and categorize what we were seeing. Much of what we think is fixed is actually far more fluid than most people recognize. Look at biological sex, or whether or not pineapple is supposed to go on pizza. But it is true that there are people out there who have always had non-normative desires who feel it is just as much a part of themselves as their eye color is. Also, I think I find myself feeling a little uncomfortable with discussion around a gay man who gets married is technically assimilating into the state and therefore doesn't really qualify as queer, but then a straight guy with 2 girlfriends, if they're not getting married, they are more queer because they are disrupting norms, I guess, a bit more somehow. It just all kind of makes me feel a sort of way, because then we're kind of setting up this whole you have to be this queer to get on the queer ride or something. And I don't know, as a bisexual, I already struggle with a lot of am I queer enough feelings as is because of the number of men I've dated and continue to be attracted to. So I don't know, this whole conversation just makes me feel a little uncomfortable because it feels a little too familiar. But honestly, I do just want to acknowledge that it could just be that there is some gap in my understanding of the other side of the argument here. It could be that I just missed something when I was doing some research, and maybe it's just my own biases coming through right now. I told you I'm bad at queer theory. I also don't really like the term homonormativity, partially because it's hard to say, but also because what we're really describing here is heteronormativity as applied to gay people and how straight they're acting. And I don't know, it just isn't quite the same thing. It's not really a one-to-one comparison. I literally have no idea if I'm making any sense in this section. This script was so hard to write, y'all. Do you understand why I got delayed? Anyway, non-monogamy is certainly not a mainstream ideal, and even for those non-monogamous out there who do assimilate to a certain extent, they may still be labeled as queer for having a non-normative lifestyle. Speaking of choice, this is a really good point to talk about an important aspect of this whole conversation, and a question that comes up quite a bit in this discourse. Is being non-monogamous a choice, or is it innate?
So many questions about this journey, but what I want to know.
In my opinion, based on the conversations that I've seen and been a part of, this is really where the whole is polyamory a queer identity debate really gets focused on. Because if one chooses to be non-monogamous, then that seems to kind of undermine the idea or possibility of it being the same as a sexual or romantic orientation. Therefore, born this way is sometimes employed by non-monogamists who do believe that their ability to love multiple people is innate.
I think I do see my polyamory as an orientation. At first, I wanted to say that it was closer to the quote-unquote lifestyle choice narrative people tried to prescribe to a lot of gay and queer orientations in the 90s and 2000s, which they still definitely do, but I don't think it actually is a choice any more than being queer is a choice. You can choose to pursue your queerness or not, but presumably, even if you don't pursue it, it's still going to be there. I did make a conscious choice to pursue polyamory once I felt like I was in the right place and time in my life for it. I've always seen it as something people kind of just are or aren't capable of in their hearts. Like, some people's hearts can only hold one romantic love at a time, some people can hold multiple, and everything in between. But I don't feel essentialist about that. I think it can change throughout one's life. It did for me. I'm still not completely deprogrammed from hangups and jealousy and things like that. I don't think anyone is. But at one point in my life, I introspected and figured that it was conceivable to me then when it simply hadn't been prior. Then I pursued it and found out how to make it work with my life and that my heart actually thrives in that environment. Yay!
The Born This Way narrative is one that has been largely embraced by the queer community as a slogan, as a way of sort of combating the homophobic assertions of bigots out there that it's nothing more than some kind of deviant lifestyle, a series of behaviors we could just choose to not partake in. I don't really think people choose whether or not to be gay or straight. I think chemistry is chemistry and can be affected by a number of potential things. Smell, your mood that day, societal upbringing, whether or not you've been imbued with anything recently, etc. You can choose on whether or not to act on those desires and feelings, but I don't think you really choose to have them. And yes, I am avoiding the subject of political lesbianism because I just don't want to talk about it, and I don't find it very compelling. The majority of straight people I know never really chose to be straight. They just never felt a strong enough attraction to someone who fit outside of the normative desires they have been brought up with to really feel a need to pursue it. So for queer people, the Born This Way narrative is really just a way of saying, hey, you didn't choose to be straight, and I didn't choose to be queer. However, as Sarah points out in that video, which I am obviously a bit obsessed with, the Born This Way narrative is flawed and a bit too simplistic. It ignores how people's identities can change, like how one day you can be a loud and proud lesbian and then almost out of the blue fall in love with a man, like the author of Orange is the New Black did. Yeah, I know it's a little cringe that I own this book. Please don't judge me. While I believe that the majority of queer people didn't, choose to be queer, I also don't know if I completely buy into us having been born this way either. I don't think that there is a tangible gay gene any more than I think there is a tangible straight gene. But then again, that could also be out of concerns that if ever such a gene was found and discovered, we'd be then dealing with some kind of, eugenics nightmare of people trying to cure gayness with some kind of medical thing. But also, I've read a lot of dystopian novels. Some people truly feel that they have always been non-monogamous, that it is far more natural for them than being in exclusive relationships ever did.
Poly by orientation people often mention being oriented toward multiple people since childhood, such as pretending to have multiple spouses when they played house, or socializing in groups instead of having a single best friend. Many emphasize a profound discomfort with monogamy and an inability to remain in monogamous relationships. One respondent summarized monogamous relationships as like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. You can cram your foot in there momentarily, but you won't like it, and you won't be able to walk very far. I see my polyamory as being very much a part of how I love, how I relationship. It's come upon me sort of like you hear about people coming out over time, like coming to terms with themselves. I experimented with non-monogamy in college, and, people seem to just think that was like a phase. Certainly we didn't have any words for it. We didn't know polyamory. We didn't have a good setup, and people got hurt, and I was the only one who really wanted it in the end. And so I thought I was just wrong for wanting it. I thought, maybe I'm just kind of broken because I don't understand Well, first of all, I don't understand jealousy, which is not a requirement for polyamory, to be clear. That's just me. I don't understand relationship jealousy. I don't understand the possessiveness. I don't understand why I have to limit my love. I'm willing to do it if I love someone enough, but it is difficult. It's hard.
Others do feel, though, that it was a choice, something less innate or natural to them and more just a logical conclusion they reached.
For the choice and lifestyle crowd, there's much more flexibility to find fulfillment in a range of relationship styles. In some cases, people choose polyamory for a specific period of time, while they're young and don't have children, after a divorce when they want to play the field in an open and honest way, or after their kids have moved out and they feel more freedom to experiment with their sexuality. For others, it's a more permanent choice, often supported by community connections and social political beliefs that de-emphasize ownership and encourage self-responsibility.
In general, I don't like thinking of any interpersonal relationships in terms of orientation or even identity, and polyamory to me perfectly embodies this. I think one can say they're polyamorous as their sexual orientation, and good for them, but I don't find this identification very helpful when actually conducting relationships. Polyamory, or as I prefer to call it, relationship anarchy, isn't an identity but a practice. It's not something one inherently is or isn't. It's a model for cultivating and conducting interpersonal relationships. I think anyone can practice polyamory and potentially benefit from it. And thinking of polyamory/monogamy as a binary orientation only serves to confine and oppress us.
I feel like I should start by saying that in a very similar vein to how I think about queerness, I define non-monogamy as the rejection of exclusivity rather than a way to describe the number of relationships that a person is engaging in at any given moment. That's like a whole other recurring debate for another time. But to me, non-monogamy, and especially relationship anarchy, is fundamentally about the queering of interpersonal relationships and norms. I believe that any bioessentialist understanding of traits, such as orientation, is far, far more detrimental than beneficial in the long run. I think that subscribing to the notion of fixed, predetermined, immutable characteristics and identities is inherently colonial in nature, that every categorization that we could conceivably come up with is in direct contrast to something else that we are trying to describe based on our own subjective standpoints and biases situated within a whole rather than objective truths about the state of the universe. That said, we live in the present day. Theoretic abstractions exist to help us understand and improve material conditions. And in the present day, people's orientations are shaped in certain ways and must be respected. So I do, and I don't. My hot take is that everyone has the capacity for queerness and non-monogamy, especially under less hierarchical, less hegemonic circumstances. And that the constraints of cis-heteropatriarchy or cis-heteronormativity, mononormativity, amatonormativity are harmful limitations that exist to reduce our ability to relate with one another in service of maintaining said hierarchical hegemonic status quo. Capitalism.
For myself, I definitely fit a lot more into that second category regarding my non-monogamous journey. It was something that I learned a lot about, mostly from seeing other people in my community, doing some reading and research, and it just kind of made sense to me. I already wasn't a fan of lording romantic relationships over all else and had already dealt with quite a few toxic shenanigans because of that. As for being bisexual, I have a lot more, complicated feelings around that. I definitely am not one of those people who always knew that I wasn't straight. I was well into college before I realized that maybe some of my desires didn't exactly fit into this, cutesy, adventurous woman act that I was putting on. I remember very specifically seeing a beautiful woman and thinking oh man, I wish we were at a party both drunk so we could make out. And then I was just wait a second, hang on. Certainly I can look back now and see certain signs, little crushes and obsessions that at the time I convinced myself didn't really mean anything. What? She's just neat. Just a neat lady. Just a cat lady with whips covered in latex. Just don't think about it.
I've got a friend, Jenny, driving me insane.
So the Born This Way narrative doesn't really feel right for me either, but I can also acknowledge that I probably have been not straight for far longer than I've realized. For me, my queerness kind of feels a little bit more like my personality, like who I am is who I am. Like, I try to be as authentic as possible, but like, I don't think I was necessarily born this way. The Mandy that you see before you is the result of a lot of growth and trauma and more trauma and elation and family situations and societal coding and me making adjustments as to the kind of person that feels the most natural to me while also growing and evolving. Nature, nurture, Catwoman, who's to say?
Do I see my polyamory or my non-monogamy as being an orientation? No, I don't. But I also don't think that things need to be fixed or oriented in order to be queer, right? Like, as time marches forward, we're getting more and more of a sense that, like, sexuality is fluid, or if it's not, our understanding of it can change over time. And so if our understanding of it, or our labels for it, or our representations of ourselves can change over time, did our personhood change, or did our lives and our experiences of our lives change, and that then changed labels? Which of those things is true? Is it chicken? Is it egg? Or is it that using an argument that something is a fixed and an inborn trait made it easier to gain legal recognition for rights for folks? I get uncomfortable with sort of naming almost anything as an orientation, because I think it implies too fixed a reality. But on top of that, I don't think that orientation is necessary for this conversation about whether or not polyamory can exist as a queer identity. Because, like, for example, transness is included under the umbrella of being queer and has nothing to do with sexual orientation, right? Or has nothing to do with unorientation. It is about one's essential self and one's gender, but not about one's orientation of some kind.
Part of the reason why some people have such a push for wanting non-monogamy to be recognized as essentially the same as an orientation is out of a desire for wanting legal protections. In fact, that was a pretty reoccurring theme in my research.
Arguments over poly's status as an orientation are often more pragmatic than philosophical. On her Practical Polyamory blog, poly advocate Anita Wagner wrote that by recognizing polyamory as such, non-monogamous persons can acquire a sense of identity that becomes the bedrock upon which we can build a life that will withstand the external cultural challenges we sometimes encounter. And the fight for such recognition has practical consequences. As Sarah Taub of Network for a New Culture wrote in a discussion at the time, the reason polyamorous people want such recognition is political and linked to struggles for rights and freedoms.
But I actually am going to get into more detail about that at a later part in this video, so for right now, just put a pin in that. I do actually have pins, they're over there, because I am a professional YouTuber. Before we wrap this section up, just a final note before we move on from talking about if non-monogamy is a choice or innate. There is a less ethical way to go about non-monogamy that I have not acknowledged yet. Cheating, it's called cheating, and a lot of people engage with it. Arguably, it's more accepted than being openly non-monogamous. So here's the question that I have. If non-monogamy is akin to a sexual or romantic orientation, does that mean that anyone currently in or who has ever been in an illicit affair a closeted non-monogamist?
The nearly universal character of non-monogamous desire, compared with the much smaller subset of people who act on it polyamorously, may suggest that at least the desire aspect of polyamory is not unique, a fact which may make it harder for polyamorists to convincingly describe themselves as a unique group, at least one based on polyamorous desires. This apparent universality of non-monogamous desires may also make it difficult for polyamorists to claim the most entrenched form of a constructed identity, under which the individual experiences his or her identity classification as unchosen and unchangeable, although some polyamorists do experience their identities in that way.
I don't really have an answer for this, by the way. This is just kind of like an interesting question that I think about sometimes and really wanted to pass on to all of you. Certainly, I think both being monogamous and non-monogamous are natural for some people. Even with me having made the active choice to be non-monogamous, I do still feel like I'm acting well within what feels comfortable and natural for me. How innate either all as default is very difficult to judge when we live in a mononormative society. Maybe one day, free of all the assumptions and societal coding that is shoved down our throats on a daily basis, we'll know for sure. But until then, I guess we can really only speculate. Before we get into the next section of the video, let's take a little pause and go into our activism corner. So today's little activism corner invitation to act out segment hits on a bit more of a personal note than some of my previous videos have. Caelan Conrad, friend of the channel and my fellow co-host on our podcast Respect the Dead, was recently the victim of a pretty nasty smear campaign. And of course, someone's vacuuming right now. Many provable lies were spread, connections made that did not exist anywhere in reality, and as a result, they received a huge, unnecessary wave of harassment. Caelan has been a supportive friend for me almost since the beginning of my time here as YouTube. I've honestly lost track of the number of times that they have helped me out with a video, or we've spent hours just like venting about things, or, you know, they've been supportive of me when I've been going through a hard time. And like, to help demonstrate the kind of person Caelan is, here's just like one of many stories I could tell. There was this one time we were talking, I think this was probably like sometime last year, and I mentioned in this sort of offhanded way that my phone charger was acting up, because at the time the phone charger I had to like, it was that thing where like the wire was all fucked up or something, so you had to put it in a very specific way in order for it to actually charge. So like sometimes if I didn't actually put it that way, it wouldn't charge, and it was just really annoying. And the next thing I know, just completely unprompted, Caelan tells me that I have 2 phone chargers on the way. Like, they just bought me a couple of phone chargers and immediately sent them my way. Like, that's the kind of person they are. So today, I am asking those of you who have enjoyed myself and Caelan's content to please show them some support right now. I do not recommend engaging at all with those who are spreading the hate and misinformation, especially those who have much larger platforms. What I instead would recommend is engaging in a far more positive way. Maybe send them an email explaining how much their art has meant to you. Share those videos with your friends on your YouTube community tab or elsewhere. If you're in a good place financially, you could also support them with some monies by going over to patreon.com/Caelan Conrad. You can do that right now. Like literally right now. What are you waiting for? Okay, you can wait until after this video is open if you want. Or at the very least, open another tab. Caelan has done a lot to dismantle the many lies and bigotry of gender-critical feminists working undercover in those spaces for months at a time. They believe very much in queer liberation, community, and the power of art. I would really love for them to know how much they are loved and appreciated. So please show Caelan some support right now, send them some kind words, share their videos, and or support them financially if you are able to. And if Caelan is watching, which they probably are because they are a very good friend in that way, I would just like to say that I love you so much. I am incredibly grateful to have you in my life, and I hope to have you in my life for many more decades to come. Thank you so much for the times when you've listened to me vent or get really anxious about something that really wasn't that big of a deal, but to me, so of course I was spiraling. And just for continuing to be one of the most talented, courageous people I have ever known. You inspire me all the time, whether with your wit or your art or your amazing decorative skills. Caelan's apartment's really cute, just so everybody knows. And I am just really humbled and grateful to have you in my life. Your art matters. You matter. And I hope you remember that. Okay, now before we get too gay here, let's get back to the video.
Why haven't you tried to kiss me on my cute button nose?
One of the questions I specifically asked my participants was if they were aware of the history of non-monogamy within queer spaces.
Not heaps. Not heaps.
I am familiar with a great deal of history regarding non-monogamy within queer movements, also other leftist, feminist, and anarchist movements, #free love.
Not at all, honestly, but I do get the sense that non-monogamy has always been more common in queer history. Is that correct? I've always just sort of assumed that.
I did this partially out of curiosity, and partially because I'm a little mischievous. I'm a trickster. Because sometimes it does feel in particular that queer people see non-monogamous folks as being this like whole separate community, when in fact there is quite a bit of overlap between the two communities. Intersectionality.
As anyone who has seen me before probably knows, my area of specialization is a little further back than modern queer theory. I do most of my research on ancient Greece, and a little bit on ancient Rome, and a little bit on ancient India, and ancient Egypt, that sort of area. So, have there been polyamorous people forever? Yes. Yes. Have there been codified polyamorous relationships in previous societies? Yes. Absolutely. 100%. Like Socrates. He was married, he had a wife. You had to have a marriage partner of the opposite sex if you wanted to be part of the elite society and stay within them. That, yes. Obviously, he was not unavailable to sleep with others, including men, since Alcibiades, a young general, was in love with him. Enough for us to get jokes about it in Plato, who does not joke very often.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, the 1960s and 70s, often referred to as the sexual revolution, was an ideal time for queer people to explore relationships that falled outside of the normative ideals and structures. They could play around what was deemed acceptable, which did include sometimes exploring non-monogamy. Swinging, polyamorous communes, open relationships. It honestly sounded like kind of a fun time to be polyam. Now, admittedly, this is all before the AIDS epidemic, which would, putting it really mildly, really kill the mood for a while.
Swinging, group marriages, communes, and polyamorous communities all contributed to the burgeoning second wave of consensual non-monogamy in the United States in the 1960s and 70s. In the 1980s, the sexual revolution collided with the spread of AIDS and other sexually transmitted infections, and the resulting backlash drove discussion of group sex and multiple partners out of mainstream society. Academic research on sexually non-exclusive relationships dwindled significantly during this period.
But that history is still there. It's still part of the queer community, even for those who aren't actually interested in anything outside of a closed, exclusive relationship. To this day, there are many gay men whose relationships do not fall neatly into the ideal monogamous model.
In 2005, a study found that more than 40% of gay men had an agreement that sex outside the relationship was permissible, while less than 5% of heterosexual and lesbian couples reported the same.
The queer and polyamorous overlap might be why there is so much shared language between the two communities. Think of polyamorous, who describes the sharing of their non-monogamous life as a coming out, and the inverse as still being in the closet. Polyamory recognition even appears in some pride events. Here in Portland, Maine, I am proud and happy to report that there have been several times over the past few years in which there was a polyamorous specific section of the Pride Parade. And I admit I really want to be in it someday.
So, am I familiar with literally any and all queer history? Yeah, no, of course. Like, by design, historical queerness is has always complemented and even necessitated the practice of non-monogamy. It's fascinating. They really are inseparable.
In many ways, polyamory's relationship and place within queer communities and spaces reflects that of kink. Yes, kink can, of course, be engaged with bi, cis, het people. It happens all the time. But it is important to still recognize its place within queer spaces. Kink belongs in pride, motherfuckers. Die mad. I'm not staying here for very long, but this was something that I wanted to make sure to bring up, because I think viewing the queer community and the polyamorous community as completely separate entities, ignoring their close interwoven history, makes this conversation incomplete. Because a concern that almost always comes up when we're discussing non-monogamy and queerness is that of,
is it something I did? Oh, Jenny, Jenny, I need you.
the fear of queer spaces being infiltrated, of queerness no longer being a proud identity, but more window dressing, easily removed when it's, past Pride Month, is one that I have seen brought up on multiple occasions. It's one of the many reasons why queer people are so quick to disown unicorn hunters, not wanting them to represent the community because of how they, blow and such.
People start to notice the effect that certain constraints are having on their lives, and so begin to push at those constraints in different ways, and that's usually a good thing. It's ultimately a good thing. Unfortunately, it is common for people who are, I don't love the word privileged, but let's say less connected to certain forms of marginalization, to then take on a more assimilationist lean. There comes a point where you have to figure out for yourself, I think, whether you're in this for liberation or equality, solidarity or reprieve, freedom or privilege. And in my experience, straight polyamorous folks identifying with queerness have very solidly fallen into the latter camp. The Alphabet Mafia has a long and storied history of being pretty assimilationist. There is a well-documented pattern of queers throwing intersectionality, and especially more marginalized members of the community, under the bus whenever solidarity starts to feel costly. And that's where co-optation and appropriation really start to fester within communities. So in a way, straight non-monogamous folks appropriating queerness by demanding to be let into community spaces without doing the work of decolonizing their minds and learning how to be in community are only following a time-honored tradition or precedent set by the more powerful members of this community.
I'm always curious when cishet people want to be a part of queer spaces in regards to their non-monogamy, etc. Why? Because are they here for the parties? Are they here to feel better about themselves? Because I'll use my cultural identity as an example. I am pretty darn heckin' pale, as I'm sure you can tell, unless you're just using this video as a podcast. So I have a lot of white privilege, and for ages I could not accept that because it felt really weird in meeting with the experiences of, well, especially in my dad, who is several shades darker than me, and that's because it's uncomfortable to sit with, the privileges you have or the ways that the systems around you benefit you. So, similarly, I could see a non-monogamous polyam person trying to gain access to the queer community to feel better about the ways in which the cis heteronormative systems benefit them. I can see that, and whilst that is in some ways understandable, I would really hope that if someone is engaging in the community, it's because they're bound up in that same fight for our liberation. If it's just for the parties, and if it's just to feel better about yourself, I would encourage those people to just learn to sit with a bit of discomfort. It's hard. It is hard. But it is worth doing. Because growth is uncomfortable.
Queerness being appropriated by some kind of mainstream celebrity or a corporation is certainly a topic that can be trending at basically any given time. This video isn't going to specifically in detail tackle the subject of rainbow capitalism, but it is a fair concern. I don't want Starbucks to embrace queerness so that they can, sell more coffee. I want it embraced so we can have some more rights, please. And honestly, yeah, I have at times heard non-monogamous who otherwise would be labeled as cis-het use some queer-coded language, much like what was discussed in the previous section. But I do have to wonder, who out there isn't queer who is actually trying to, en masse, infiltrate queer spaces? How many people who want to call themselves queer aren't already queer in some more traditionally defined way?
As far as I'm concerned, if one approaches either the polyam or queer communities with sincerity, it's hypocritical and even kind of heinous for us to turn such people away. Because guess what? When people earnestly approach and try to ingratiate themselves into queerness and the community, it's usually because, like the rest of us, they're looking for a place to belong and just be themselves. I also hate the idea of queerness being something that can actually be appropriated. I mean, as far as taking issue with individuals capitalizing on queerness to make money or generate press go, well, I mean, I got some bad news about literally every openly queer celebrity today. But outside of who materially profits off of our commodification, our queerness is our power and our joy. And as long as human beings in society exist at all, queerness is an unlimited resource. We should be sharing this resource with anyone and everyone who desires it.
If I think that polyamory and living a polyamorous life is inherently queer, then how can you be polyamorous and appropriate queerness? Let's re-ask the question. If we're excluding the people who are just covering for their bad behavior using this excuse, then I don't really know that that's possible. On the other hand, I have also seen some polyamorous people trying to barge into spaces that intersect with queer identities that have other types of oppression associated, and that is just wild. And that is the same thing to me as when white queers try and say that racism doesn't exist in their space, or when gay men decide that they can feel up women however they want because, well, they don't mean it.
So the concern around appropriation can ring a bit hollow to some because it can kind of sound a bit, well, gatekeepy. A way of, as we discussed in a previous section, creating acceptable and unacceptable queerness, limiting the way that some people might decide to express themselves in more normative, read straight ways. And honestly, what even is the appropriation of queerness? Like, are we worried that straight people are going to listen to Janelle Monáe a little too hard? Now, I am a white lady who does try to do my best to listen to conversations around the concerns around, appropriating marginalized identities. So I have had those concerns in the past too. I want to be really mindful of adopting something that I have no business doing. But to be honest with you all, I don't know if I've ever really experienced somebody claiming queerness in a way that made me feel uncomfortable or like it somehow lessened the concept. At least not in any real life experiences or in my own communities. I'm speaking from my own experiences, of course, though. I don't want to say it's not happening. I just really agree with Laura's point that she made here.
Almost no one is sitting around going, but am I queer enough to say that I'm queer? Unless it's that they're on the brink of making some other decision about their identity, right? The times in my life where I've been like, oh, am I queer enough to say that I'm queer? 6 months before I came out, right? My friends were saying these things right before they ended up sort of sharing with all of us about gender identity situations that they were having and whether or not they were transitioning and whether or not they were going to be doing different sort of things about that. Those, I think, are much more realistic and pressing concerns than whether or not polyamory as an identity is queer. Because I think the people who insist that it's not are mostly building up the same kind of fear-mongering situation that they used to do about bi people bringing their straight partners to Pride, right? Like, bi people would bring their straight partners and their straight partners would be predatory in our spaces. That's not how this works, right? And very similarly, these straight polyamorous are going to come and they're gonna like hit on all of the bi women and everyone is going to be unicorn hunted to death. No, you're not.
Certainly, if you've ever experienced someone appropriating queerness, particularly in non-monogamous spaces, I would be very interested to hear more about that. Please feel free to leave a comment down below. I always read all my comments, so please do, and I will definitely read it.
I dyed my hair purple. Don't you know that's gay?
This section is probably going to piss some people off. But we have to discuss it because a pretty big discussion point in the anti-polyamory is queer conversation is that people who are non-monogamous do not experience oppression in the way that, quote, real queer people do. But what even is oppression? The dictionary defines oppression by blah, blah, blah. This is the fake dictionary bit, huh? Wow, you stole this from other far more impressive YouTubers like Abigail Thorne and the leftist cooks. You are a hack and a loser, and your channel's never going to go anywhere. 6,000 subscribers. I wipe my ass with 6,000 subscribers. And then it just makes a lot of fart noises after that. Okay, but seriously, let's actually break this down. When people think oppression, they tend to think of obvious examples of somebody pushing the tyranny of their views on a group of people. Something very explicit and obvious. And yes, that sometimes is true. Look at the current attempts to try and erase trans people from public and private life. Gender-affirming care being strictly regulated or outlawed. Bathrooms turning into mini panopticons. The language itself being deemed too unsafe to bring anywhere near children.
And for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
These are attempts at genocide, make no mistake about it. But I think we need to recognize that oppression isn't always about what is being said. Sometimes it's about what's not being said, what's considered too taboo to even discuss, or so outside of the norm it's just understood that it's not to be engaged with. For example, asexuality. Now, I obviously can't speak to all of my audience's experiences, and I am also a 35-year-old white lady who grew up in Central Maine in the 90s, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But growing up, I was not informed about asexuality outside of the context of microscopic life forms. In fact, I didn't even know that people out there identified with that label until I saw the documentary Asexual back when it was still on Netflix. Between that and Ash Hardell's The ABC of LGBT+ series, which includes a couple of special videos dedicated solely on the subject, I didn't really become educated about this until my mid to late 20s. I bring up aces because there is a lot of debate about whether or not they belong under the queer umbrella. The argument being that there has never been legislation that has specifically targeted them in the same way that there has been for gays and lesbians. But just because aros, aces, and demis have never been specifically named and targeted in legislation, it doesn't mean that they are accepted identities that don't have their own struggles and challenges to contend with.
I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who disagree with me on this. But I think even in how aspecs talk between each other about our experiences, once we've had that initial 101 awakening to, oh, we don't do attraction to other people, at least in the expected way. Once they've had that epiphany, community talks about these intricacies of how we relate to each other a lot, and I think there is a lot of comparison there, and a lot of fair comparison there. And the last thing I want is for someone to take my words and spin it into an aspecs don't belong in the queer community, because that's just bullshit. Like, when people are, when, like, essentially not experiencing sex in the way that is expected is still considered like a treatable mental disorder unless someone identifies. But, like, how is someone going to identify if they don't know it exists? Like, when that's still a thing in the fucking DSM. When, people are making pills to try and get people to be, you know, less aspec-like. I don't think there's even an argument there that the aspecs are not oppressed and thus don't belong in the queer community.
That's a big question. Like I mentioned, I am some form of gray sexual, but I don't really think of it as my identity so much as just another aspect of the way I approach and conduct my interpersonal relationships. It's a practice, a way for me to process and understand my feelings about myself and other people. So I'm hesitant to really speak to the general ace perspective, but I definitely see my norm-defying gray sexuality and aromanticism as interconnected to my polyamory. So yeah, it's a fair comparison.
As somebody who is affected by both of those things, they feel incredibly similar to me. And if we're going to go ahead and say that agender and asexual fall under queer, then I can't see how polyamory doesn't. Now, I'm interested in those arguments, and Mandy will tell you that I actually messaged her to see whether or not I should count as queer for purposes of this interview, because I still have my own quandaries with where I fall in terms of queerness. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, right? It's a matter of relational politics. And I'm queer, but I'm very straight passing. And that makes me doubt myself.
Allosexuality are those who experience sexual attraction, which is considered the more, traditionally understood meaning of the word, is considered the norm. It's considered normal and healthy and pushed with an intensity that honestly a lot of us just don't even notice anymore. Asexuals may be told that not experiencing sexual attraction is a sign of some kind of problem, a disease or illness.
Lots of people don't have sex. The only people who don't want it are either sick, dead, or lying.
Similar feedback is given to those on the more aromantic side of the spectrum too, by the way. Isn't denying the very existence of people who experience this, asexuality, demisexuality, or such on that spectrum, identities that definitely exist outside of the amatonormative and allosexual ideal that we've been fed since birth, a form of oppression? Much in the same way, non-monogamy has faced similar issues. It's just known, supposedly, that polyamory does not work nearly as well as closed monogamous relationships do. Being polyamorous is not normalized at all to nearly the same degree as monogamy is, even with the minimal increase in visibility that we've received in the last few decades. People have and continue to treat non-monogamous as freaks, deviants, weirdos, and sometimes even dangerous sexual perverts.
I mean, usually in the workplaces I've been a part of, my personal relationships don't really come up, but when my polyamory is revealed, a lot of people react with confusion or discomfort. I think it's unfamiliarity. It's not seismically shocking anymore to the average person today to learn that someone is gay or trans. We're getting used to that and normalizing it more every day. But people are still unfamiliar enough with polyamory to be disarmed upon learning that someone practices it in some form, hence showing more visible discomfort. But when you say discrimination, though, I think of treatment on an institutional level, and I personally haven't encountered or even been presented with any convincing examples of systemic discrimination based on my polyamory.
And even with that said, I do want to make it very clear that there have been times in history in which polyamory has been specifically targeted within the legal system. We can and sometimes do face oppression simply for being polyamorous. For example, a woman in Australia, Susan Bunning, was fired by her employers, the Catholic Church, when they found out that she was polyamorous. She was found in an online community and, quote, was accused of gross misconduct, breaching the company's code of conduct, and bringing it into disrepute. She took the case to the High Court, but the judge told her that being polyamorous was not a protected orientation, but simply a chosen behavior. I've mentioned on this channel before that polyamorous Americans are often barred from attaining legal multiple marriages or partnerships outside of a few places in the U.S. Some of them choose to get around this by forming LLCs. So romantic. And there are other ways that people who are polyamorous are discriminated against using the legal system.
In some states, such as Alabama and Florida, polyamory is effectively criminalized through anti-adultery and anti-bigamy laws. In other states like Connecticut, zoning laws restrict the number of unmarried adults who can live together, laws that have been used against polyamorous families before. No legal recourse exists in the U.S. for someone who, like the Australian counselor, gets fired for being non-monogamous. Ultimately, many polyamorists would like the right to marry more than one person, as well as gain legal protection against persecution.
We talked about this a little bit when discussing non-monogamy as an orientation. There are some believe that should we decide to actually do this, make non-monogamy a recognized orientation, we can get it legal protections that we are currently lacking. One such advocate is lawyer Ann Tweedy. Tweedy wrote an article in 2010 called Polyamory as Sexual Orientation, in which she argues that the definition of a sexual or romantic orientation should be expanded upon. She doesn't just stop at having non-monogamy as a preference, though. She wants to include all preferences in this definition, citing some other sources to back this claim up.
Dr. Hubbard has argued that many of us have other strong and consistent sexual orientations towards certain hair colors, body shapes, and racial types. The bisexual theorist Jennifer Bob Gardner has also used the term in an all-encompassing fashion, albeit without arguing explicitly for such usage. For example, Bob Gardner has suggested, with respect to Ellen DeGeneres, that dating straight-looking blonde starlets is, if anything, her sexual orientation. Similarly, Bob Gardner has used the synonymous term sexual preference just as broadly. Some lesbians date only bi women. You could call it a sexual preference.
Honestly, I don't really agree with Tweedy here, at least not on this particular point. I have talked at length on this channel before about how people's personal preferences are not just like these randomly occurring things that they are just happen to be born with. There are plenty of preferences that are based very much in real world biases and societal coding that we are brought up on. And if you don't pay attention, sure, they can seem innate, but usually they're not. Like, I'm sorry to pull this card, but I'm gonna do it. As a fat woman, I am not interested in entertaining for even a second that people's preferences for thin, like conventionally more attractive bodies is somehow like just a natural orientation. Like, considering how much blatantly fatphobic messaging there is out there, hi the whale, you. I'm just personally not interested in helping people justify their fat phobia by calling it an orientation. I'm just not.
Hey everybody, Editing Mandy here. Hope you didn't forget about me. Honestly, I could have gone into a lot more detail about my issue with this quote and why I take issue with Tweedy's argument here generally, like saying like, oh, you know, having a racial bias is totally just an orientation. Like, oof, that's a big yikes, huh? Yeah, it's a real big yikes. And I apologize I didn't go into more detail here, nor am I going to do so now because I don't want to completely derail this video, and it's already pretty long. Like, I was hoping to have this done a couple days ago, and I did not. So, apologies for not going into more depth about this. I also take really big issue with the part about, like, Ellen DeGeneres' type being, quote, straight-looking women. Like, that just feels like such a low blow to some of her partners, and I'm just not a fan, but I'm also going to basically move on from this point to wrap this section up in a second here. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I apologize if that's a little disappointing that previous me didn't go into this more, but like, I hope you all recognize that I obviously dislike this argument. I think I made that clear, but just in case, here's me doing my thing. You're all pretty, thank you.
With that said, I do think Tweedy's desire to have polyamorous people's rights be, protected much in the same way that monogamous people have is admirable.
Poly parents' potential loss of custody due to arguments that polyamory will harm their children is one of the most important of such risks. Employment discrimination is also a potential consequence of openly espousing polyamory, with the result that many polyamorists appear to remain closeted at work. Additionally, in one survey, polyamorists identified employment non-discrimination as one of their 3 highest priority legal issues. Furthermore, there is evidence that children of poly parents face harassment at school.
Before I started filming, I actually came upon a 2020 study in which over 60% of participants, representing 2/3 of the polyamorous community, reported that they had experienced discrimination for being polyamorous.
I personally have not, luckily. I mean, like, you get the occasional, like, weird comment from soccer moms as a fellow soccer mom, right? But, like, that's about it. I know some of my friends who are fellow polyamorous parents occasionally get other kids whose parents don't want them to come over the house because those are the people whose parents have that weird lifestyle, right? Like, that kind of thing. But nothing that really rises to the level of discrimination. But I know of people who have had that kind of experience, right? The sort of secondhand, we've talked online about it. I'm doing research for my next book, and I've spoken to folks who have had legal problems regarding their housing, in terms of not being able to get leases or not being able to put all their partners on their mortgage or things like this, right? So there are different obstacles that do exist.
When I was in college, I don't think I'd ever heard the term polyamorous. I don't think I'd ever heard of non-monogamy as anything other than, like, an anthropological description of civilizations that were somehow lesser, you know? So, like, I knew intellectually that other configurations were possible, but it never was something that was approachable even in conversation. Whereas now I find myself surrounded by people who are polyamorous, and it took me a long time to open up and realize that that's what I was feeling, that's what I wanted, and it wasn't just, oh, I went through a phase in college and now I'm just, you know, stuck in a box. And that's also true legally. As I said, I live in Massachusetts, and near where I live, there is a city that has legally recognized polyamorous relationships in a couple of different important ways. And that's amazing to me. That's something I didn't even know I wanted until I heard about it, and now I'm like kind of I'm verklempt. Imagine a world where you didn't have to be restricted to one partner for any reason. Unless you wanted to. Doesn't that sound liberating?
Oh, Jenny's broken all our hearts, but I don't care.
Do you think we'll ever come to an agreement about this? No!
Probably not. I expect that even in this video there'll be a great deal of disagreement. I'm okay with us not all being on the same page. I really am.
Do I think we'll ever come to an agreement about this? I doubt it. I mean, at some point, yes. History comes to consensus eventually, but it's on like 20, 30-year cycles. So by then, I'll still be interested, but most people won't.
I think there's a universe in which we can acknowledge our privileges or lack thereof and the nuances each demand. I think it'll be an uphill battle, but anything's possible. I mean, it's arguably way more of an uphill battle for other forms of queerness, but I do think they're all connected, and solidarity for one should imply an appropriate solidarity for all the others.
Oh, of course not. We'll never agree on anything, but that doesn't matter. Differences in perspective and opinion are what make life interesting, after all. Disagreement isn't the issue. Power is. And I do think it is possible to dismantle the power structures responsible for the oppression polyamorous and queer people alike experience.
So here's the thing. I think if it ever becomes a national level point of contention, it will get defined real fast. Whether it's queer or something queer adjacent, or not queer at all, will be addressed if it ever becomes a bone of contention on the national or global level. Now, maybe it's the Jewish in me, but I think argumentation is good. Argue for how you see it. You can change your mind, as Auntie Khadija would say.
If you're asking how I, mainly Mandy, feel, then I will admit that I personally do not see being non-monogamous as the same as a queer identity. For me, I think it can and does interact with my queerness in interesting ways, much in the same way that my kinky interests do. But for me, it's a little bit more of a queer adjacent identity as opposed to being a inherently queer one.
It may be an open question as to whether or not polyamory qualifies as queer, but for me, the two are separate but interconnected. They mix and flow into each other as my life continues. Each continues to be an evolving adventure for me, a constant inquiry into the relational norms around me and how those norms make me happier or hold me back, always seeking to be the most authentic, compassionate self I can be.
With that said, I do think there are some very interesting arguments out there, some of which are very compelling as to why polyamory should be considered an orientation. And I'm not mad that there are people out there who disagree with me. I don't think either argument is right or wrong. I just think that there is a side in particular that makes a little more sense to me, at least for now. I have changed my mind many times about many subjects over the years. In all honesty, I've actually changed my mind a little bit on this subject already. I used to be a lot more in the camp of, no, it is not a queer identity. And anyone who disagrees is wrong. And these days I'm a lot more chill about it, or at least I'd like to hope I'm a lot more chill about it. And I can totally admit that part of this is based on my own experiences, that for me, non-monogamy really was an active choice. I chose actively to engage romantically with more than one person at a time with no promises of exclusivity. Is that inherent to me? I don't really know.
I think that knowing that subverting these norms is inherently queer would actually do a lot to help these spaces be more welcoming of the greater aspects of the queer community. Even people like me, like I said, I feel like I can't access those spaces because of gatekeeping around my approaches to things, and I think that maybe because there are these narrow constraints around what polyamory is and how it relates to the world. And even queering that, I think, could be fun and good and healthy.
I would like to see more discussion when we talk about polyamory. I would like to see more discussion of who is polyamorous, who is out there, the diversity of identities that can also be polyamorous. It's endless, but we almost always see bisexual white people, bisexual, relatively abled white people at that. This is not what it has to be. This is not who it has to be, and this is not largely who it is. I know a number of polyamorous people of color, for instance. Many disabled people in the polyamory community around me. And it's only sort of on the fringes that I find those cis-het straight white men claiming polyamory so they can sleep with a number of young white women.
What I will say is that polyamory has and is being discriminated against. I can leave you with that story of the woman in Australia, for example, fired despite having done her job for several years at that point just for being polyamorous. Or the family of 11 whose neighbors complained about them just because they weren't all related, and then had the city pursue legal action against them, citing zoning restrictions. Polyamory deserves to be protected. All relationship structures and approaches do. Because how one loves or fucks sex or who they love or how many people they are capable of loving does not affect them about whether they are a good employee or deserve medical treatment or housing.
I would like to see a practice of intentional intersectional solidarity and a commitment to deconstructing hierarchy in all ways at all times.
It seems like orientation and or gender-based queerness intersects with polyamory so statistically much that there should definitely be some more understood solidarity there if there isn't already. Straight and or cis polyamorous folks should acknowledge how intersectional polyamorous folks have it worse / different from them when sharing spaces and or platforms. But this would be true of, say, a white queer understanding their white privilege over that of queers of color and using it for good. Representation at Pride might help. I can see it being contentious for some, but I do think there are a lot more similarities than differences, even in the most different scenarios.
We need to reject or dismantle the hierarchies of power that our communities are still built around. That's where all of our work at any societal improvement at all must begin and end. All power to all the people.
I think if it ever needed to be the argument that polyamory is an orientation in order to get it the legal protections it deserves, then honestly, that doesn't bother me. I'm fine with it. Let's go. I want to be clear. I agree with Caelan Conrad that we shouldn't really be defining queerness by oppression alone, because if we do, and one day that oppression is no longer there, how are we going to define ourselves? Like, what, are we just going to declare ourselves all straight and wear khakis, watch Malcolm in the Middle, shop at Macy's? I, for one, would rather be dead. I kind of said that a little nasally. I, for one, would rather be dead. Define your queerness however you want. Obviously, I don't control you. But I, for one, define my queerness with joy, camaraderie, by exploring the intricate and complicated ways that love can form in all of its different versions. Sometimes that does mean in a relationship anarchist way, and sometimes in a chaotic bisexual way, and sometimes in other weird, more nebulous ways that I honestly have a very difficult time putting into words. As someone brilliant once said, I'm not gay as in happy. I'm queer as in fuck me. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm very sorry about the delay. This was supposed to come out last month, but honestly, I was struggling with the script a little bit and I had a lot of anxiety around it because I wanted to explain how I felt, but I also didn't really want this video to be like a solid, this is the correct answer, and anyone else who disagrees with me is wrong. Like, I really wanted this to be more about covering the discourse, but of course I also wanted to share my opinion, so I don't know. I really hope I did a good job of sort of towing that line and explaining myself, even if people do ultimately still disagree with me. And of course, you know, I would love to hear your own thoughts as well. Please tell me in the comments below how you feel about it. Do you think I nailed this? Do you think there's some arguments that I didn't cover that I should have? You know, obviously this is a very complicated discussion and I don't pretend like this was an exhaustive video, but I did try my best to focus on some of the big aspects of it. I really appreciate everybody participating in this. And I also appreciate the people who originally were going to participate, but I had some people who dropped out. You know, it's totally cool. Stuff happens. Just the fact that anybody was willing to be in this silly little video means a lot to me. And again, if you are interested in hearing everybody's full responses, I highly recommend signing up to patreon.com/mainlymandy so you have access to that. I have lots of cool little bonuses over there for my patrons that are available to everybody of all tiers because we do not believe in hierarchy here on this channel. So if you want access to that, that's where you can find it. And it would be really nice if you did. Full disclosure, there's a lot of stuff happening right now behind the scenes. I am preparing for a move. I technically don't know where I'm moving yet, but we have probably narrowed it down to one of two places. An actual house, which would be very exciting. And then there's another place we're looking at tomorrow, actually, that is through my current management company. So it seems very likely that one of those two places will be our final choice. So in the months ahead, I will be preparing for a move, which can be expensive and stressful and could affect some stuff, of course. Also, because of that move, I'm going to be using this opportunity to invest in some new equipment. I would really like to get some better lighting, and I want to upgrade my camera. I don't know if you all knew this, but I have been filming on a little dinky GoPro now on a broken tripod for quite a while now, and I would like to upgrade a little bit. So this is a really good time for you all to go over to patreon.com if you have been considering it, because that shows me that you are all interested in what I do, and that investing a few, potentially $1,000 in some upgrades will be worth it. So if you are interested in that, please do so, because I really want to there's some things I want to do with this channel in the future that it would be nice to have a better setup and everything. And once we're in a new living situation, it seems very likely that that's a good opportunity to change some things around. So if you don't mind giving me some money, that'd be cool. If you can't commit to a monthly donation, of course, a one-time donation is also totally fine. I have Venmo, PayPal, and Coffee, and all those links are down below in my description box. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate your support and patience so much. I will see you in the next video. And if you haven't already, subscribe if you want to be real gay. I don't know why it makes me giggle so much.
Not a serious question. Do you like the Polyam pride flag? Honestly, no. I voted for one of the other ones, but I'm not really, I don't really count myself as being part of the Polyam community anyways, so maybe that's for the best. I will say that it's a lot better aesthetically than the old one. Still ugly, but not as ugly, so an improvement.
Yeah, it's cute. I don't... I like the symbology of the flags, but I also don't at sometimes, it feels kind of, I don't want to say colonial, but very national and weird, but I think symbology is important, 100%, for how we communicate with each other. I think the Polyam pride flag, I think it's cute.
It is an adorable fried egg of love. I'm a fan of our fried egg of love flag. Yeah, and I have mugs with it on it if people want them for Pride Month.
I've actually not seen it before now, so you're getting my sort of live reactions. I think it's pretty cute. The triangle being off-center threw me off at first, but I'm more used to it after looking at it longer. I think symbolically that makes sense, even though the official text doesn't really point to it. I like that purple is explicitly acknowledging intersectionality. I feel like all flags and therefore communities should probably do that.
Baby, I'm an anarchist. All flags are the same to me, and they'll all look better when they're ashes. But the Polyam flag, even on its own, no. That flag is fuck ugly, even by the garish standards of 95% of other pride flags. I thought we were supposed to be fashionable people. Have our vexillologists ever even heard of color theory?
Let's see. Sure, why not? It's cute. It's a lot better than it used to be. I've seen a lot worse.
I don't know why this lady named Jenny's going around kissing so many ladies like a car full of clowns. Where is she now? How can we guess? What does she look like? How does she dress? So many questions about this Jenny, but what I wanna know, why haven't you tried to kiss me on my cute button nose? Is it something I did? Oh Jenny, Jenny, I need you. I dyed my hair purple. Don't you know that's gay? Oh, Jenny's broken all our hearts, but I don't
I lost my train of thought again. It has left the station. I lost my train of thought again. and I'm never getting it back. I'm never